Welcome to our series of free presentations about action learning. Action learning is now one of the most important approaches to personal, professional, and organizational development. For example, Warner Burke, a very prominent leader in the fields of organization development and human resources, asserts that action learning is now one of the top tools that practitioners should know about in those fields. And Jay Conger, another prominent leader in those fields, asserts that competency models, 360-degree feedback, and action learning have now become standard tools in leadership development initiatives. I'm Carter McNamara of Authenticity Consulting. We've been customizing action learning programs for many years, for all types of applications and for all types of organizations around the world. We're very pleased to bring you this series of presentations. Our hope is to make action learning even more available and more accessible to everyone. The website listed below describes much more about the series, including the presentations and the order in which to see them, as well as how best to benefit from them. So now, let's get started. In this presentation, we'll review the following topics before we go into a lot more detail about action learning. Overall, this presentation is for you to understand the big picture around action learning. So first, we'll talk about certain driving forces of change that are affecting us all and especially are affecting how we solve problems and achieve goals. We'll dispel certain myths about learning and development, myths that the action learning process dispels. Then, we'll review new trends in learning, including new principles for learning, new forms of learning, and new requirements for successful learning. Then, we'll do a top-level overview of the action learning process and how it meets each of the requirements for long-lasting, successful learning. We'll review much more about action learning in the presentation after this one. We'll close by reviewing why action learning is so very popular today. There are numerous driving forces that have changed how we learn and how we solve problems. The popularity of action learning is in response to those driving forces. The first change we'll mention is the increasingly diverse workforce. That's because customers and employees are often from around the world, and each person has unique needs, wants, and styles. We no longer can assume the same straightforward learning and development methods for everyone. People need to learn to work with very diverse styles and usually in teams, not just by oneself. Another driving force is that people are increasingly busy. Because organizations are demanding more from their people, people simply can't take long periods away from the office to go to trainings anymore. Another driving force is that people and organizations are increasingly cautious about high-priced solutions. Because there is more competition for money, including from investors and foundations, there's increased competition among organizations, which means slimmer profit margins. That all means even more attention to the bottom line. So organizations no longer can send all employees to high-priced trainings. And that all relates to the next driving force. Organizations and people expect much more from trainings. It's not enough to get new materials and let them sit on a shelf somewhere. People now expect trainings to promptly produce results in life and work. Another driving force is that changes are occurring much more rapidly. With increasing competition, organizations must respond more quickly and more effectively. And as a result of continual new solutions from new technologies, people must access many more options and do so more rapidly. And overall, as a result, people must learn much more quickly. These all combine to produce the final driving force. Problems are increasingly complex. Each new problem seems like a new situation that has not been solved before. Rarely can we simply pull an old tool or approach from the past and simply use it again in the same way. Instead, we must pull together the best ideas, try some of them, carefully reflect on the results, and collect our learning along the way. Meanwhile, we've been learning a lot about learning, including about certain myths that we all tend to have. Let's look at those. There's the myth that learning is great if it has lots of materials and glossies. We sometimes mistake quantity for quality. This is like mistaking the purchase of a book for the actual reading of it. So, we come away from trainings with a stack of very good-looking materials, but they're useless unless we apply them. Or, the myth that learning is great if it is the latest movement or product. How many of you have become acquainted with what's supposed to be a new approach, but after a while, it seems very much like something you've heard before. It's just got a new name now. There's the myth that learning is great if it seems highly complex. Many people believe that the more complex the problem, the more complex the solution must be. Not always true. But what many of us have learned is that problems are often solved by making lots of small, smart, ongoing actions and then learning from them, rather than undertaking a long, highly rational approach to the problem and then finding that by now the original problem has already changed to a new one. Or, there's the myth that learning is great if it's from the mouths of gurus. Particularly in our field of organization development, the words of gurus have much more credibility than those of the novices in our field, even if those words are exactly the same as what the rest of us are saying. A real downside to this myth of the gurus is that many of us, far too often, vastly underestimate our own wisdom. Lastly, there's the myth that learning is great if it is expensive, if it has executive-level pricing. Quite often, the more expensive the training, the more learning we think we're getting from it. But when we think about how we solve problems or achieve goals, it's rarely from a very high-priced model or procedure. You'll soon learn that action learning has dispelled each of these myths. Yet those myths are often the very reason that people sometimes miss the power of action learning when they first learn about the process. Let's look at one more myth, the myth of the one-shot training session. We've long used trainings to try to generate new learning for people. We experienced them in grade school, high school, and college, and organizations continue to use them very frequently. Yet, those trainings don't work in many situations. For example, trainings don't guide and support learners to apply and practice new information. Learners often are expected to somehow do that on their own after the training is ended. Yet, how many of us actually do that? Trainings rarely support learners to actually apply new knowledge and to make sure that that knowledge becomes capabilities to address issues in life and work. It's not enough to learn a new skill. That new skill must become a capability, a skill to get something done. And trainings rarely conform to the unique capabilities, needs, and styles of each learner. Instead, each learner is somehow expected to adjust to the style of the trainer. How many of us actually can do that? In trainings, by themselves, rarely solve complex problems or achieve major goals. Now, we're not claiming that all trainings are bad or useless, not at all. But trainings are usually best to convey specific information or a specific procedure in order to do a current routine task even better. We're not being fair to trainings to expect a lot more. So, from all these trends and research, what are the requirements for long-lasting learning? We've learned that long-lasting learning and development must be, first, focused on developing capabilities. That means converting new information to skills and then using those skills to get something done for ourselves and for our organizations. It must be based on styles and needs of learners. We all learn differently, some by listening to others, some by reading books, some by viewing charts and diagrams, and others by actually doing something with new information. We've also learned that adults generally learn best when applying new information and sharing their experiences with others. Forms of learning must be more accessible. The world is busier than ever. It's very difficult to find numerous days to leave our work in order to attend long trainings. Trainings have to match our busy schedules or we won't go. Next, learning must be less expensive. We all know that tuition is skyrocketing. Conferences and seminars are increasingly expensive. But companies are watching budgets very closely. Learning has to be much more cost-effective. Next, learning must be up to date. The driving forces that we talked about mean that there's new situations with new demands all the time. So, courses must be continually updated. We no longer can take old lectures and simply change the dates on them. Next, learning opportunities must take advantage of new technologies. We all know that the World Wide Web has transformed our lives and our learning. Those technologies bring more information and learning to more people, and for much less cost than traveling to training centers. And finally, activities for learning must cultivate continuous learning. It should guide learners to learn how to learn. There's a way to do that without continually taking classes. It means continually thinking about what you're doing and asking yourself, what happened? What brought it about? What was my role in it? Could it be better? What can I do to make it better? What can I do differently in the future? So, is there a bottom line, or are there major conclusions about the best principles of long-lasting learning? There are. First, it's not what you learn, it's how you learn, because the learning must suit the nature of the learners. Next, the best forms of learning are not removed from what actually happens in life and the workplace. The best forms are based on what actually happens in it, because it's too expensive to keep leaving work to attend trainings. Instead, life and the workplace can be rich labs for learning. Next, don't teach to people or at them, but teach with them. Adults need to be involved in the learning. They don't like to passively sit and listen. Finally, don't do trainings to simply convey new content. Help learners to actually apply the new knowledge in order to build skills and capabilities to solve problems and to achieve goals. One of the best ways to do that is to focus forms of learning on current, real problems and opportunities. By the way, these principles apply whether you're learning something to change yourself or your work, whether you're trying to solve a problem or achieving an exciting goal. Action learning meets all of these requirements for effective learning, and it conforms to all of these principles. There have been many recent breakthroughs in learning and development. These are approaches that respond to the driving forces of change and to what we're learning about how we prefer to learn. For example, there's accelerated learning. Accelerated learning can include a wide variety of methods, for example, matching the learner's learning styles, multimedia communications and tools, multiple intelligence methods, language-sensitive communications, acting and role-playing, and reflection and inquiry. There's adaptive learning. The hallmark of adaptive learning is its priority on matching the nature and the methods of learning to the nature of the individual learner, particularly by using computer-based methods and tools. Blended learning is what the phrase implies, a mixture of different types of training and learning methods, particularly that are personal, interpersonal, and computer-based. As with other types of learning, success rests on how well the different types and methods are integrated to match the nature of the learner and to accomplish the goals of the learning program. There's continuous learning, which again is learning how to learn. It's getting smarter from the cycle of learning. It's doing a better job of reflecting on what we're doing, on the results we're getting, and how we can do it even better. Then there's methods of holistic learning. That considers all aspects of the learner in the learning and development program, including his or her emotions, personality, and preferred styles of learning as well. Let's look at some more examples of new approaches. There's e-learning. This is generating new knowledge, skills, and abilities primarily by taking advantage of computer and internet-based technologies such as webinars and podcasts. A relatively recent movement is that of the learning organization. Experts are asserting that just like people can learn, organizations can learn too. That is, people can collect their learning across the organization and use it to make the organization even better. For example, people are using computer systems to collect, organize, and retrieve more information to convert it to new knowledge. That's often called knowledge management. Self-directed learning is extremely important because we're realizing that you can't teach someone something if they don't want to learn. They eventually have to take charge of their own learning. They can attend trainings, but it's up to them to apply the new information, and that goes for their career development as well. Systems thinking gives us the concept of loops of learning. For example, if we think we have a time management problem, our goal might be simply to work even harder. That's an example of single loop learning. We merely react to the situation. But double loop learning is the ability to change the goal when needed. It's working smarter rather than harder. For example, with a time management problem, we don't react to simply work harder. Instead, we work just as hard, but we've learned to plan and delegate. Then there's action learning. It can incorporate all of these approaches, and it builds them around the natural cycle that we use to solve problems and learn. Now, let's see how. So you've reviewed the big picture of action learning, so now it'll be even more meaningful to hear about the actual action learning process. Simply put, action learning is 5 to 7 or 4 to 8 members who meet in ongoing meetings. They address real-world current priorities, could be an issue or an opportunity. They coach each other to clarify the priority, but especially to select relevant and realistic actions that they can take between meetings. And then between those meetings, they take those ongoing actions, and then they assess and reflect on what happened and what they learned from it. Meanwhile, their learning comes especially from the coaching, especially questions that they ask each other, and also from reflecting on the actions that they did. Let's look at a few more definitions to deepen your understanding, but I should mention that even Reginald Rebbins, the developer of action learning, was reluctant to define it. Mike Pedler, in his book Action Learning for Managers, defines action learning as a method for individual and organizational development. Working in small groups, people tackle important organizational issues or problems and learn from their attempts to change things. In an article in Fast Company magazine, I found the following quote: "Action learning is a process for working on important business problems or opportunities in diverse teams to both develop the participants and improve the business." And Wikipedia defines action learning as an educational process whereby the participants study their own actions and experiences in order to improve performance. Learners acquire knowledge through actions and practice rather than through traditional instruction. Later on in this series, we'll review how the action learning process, or framework as I call it, can be modified to suit the nature and needs of learners and to incorporate almost any new approach to learning. Let's look at how action learning meets the requirements for learning that we talked about before. You remember that learning must be focused on developing capabilities. Well, in ongoing meetings, members share support and accountabilities to actually apply new knowledge and insights to develop skills and capabilities. Learning must be based on the styles and needs of adult learners. Well, in action learning, some members might prefer to only answer questions in a meeting, while some might prefer to give a detailed presentation at first, and some might prefer some quick brainstorming. The action learning process can be modified to suit the needs of these people. Learning must be more accessible. Action learning meetings can be scheduled by the members themselves to meet their busy schedules. Also, the straightforward process can be very accessible for people to learn and eventually even to apply themselves. Approaches to learning must be less expensive. In action learning, members do most of the work, not expensive consultants. Content must be up to date. Well, we've reviewed how action learning incorporates all of the most recent trends in learning, and it can be done face-to-face or virtually over the phone or web. Approaches to learning should include continuous learning, that is, learning how to learn. In action learning, the thoughtful questions that members share and the actions they take are perfect for generating the reflection and learning that help members to continually learn. But for now, let's look at some more reasons why the action learning process is so popular. We've reviewed some of these reasons, so we'll use this slide for just a quick summary. Action learning reflects how we really learn. It's how we solve problems and do work. It focuses on performance and on learning. It can be used as a standalone program or to enrich other programs. It can be customized for various styles and applications. It can be highly accessible and it can accommodate very busy schedules. It can be very low cost because the members do the work themselves. It's been proven to be long-lasting and powerful. We should add that in action learning, people aren't taking time away from work. They're working on work. Thank you for viewing this presentation, and we hope that you will go on to the next one. You might benefit from the following resources to add even more detail to our overviews of action learning. The website Action Learning Central references an extensive amount of free resources, including about the action learning process, each of its key elements, examples of action learning programs, and tools for each aspect of action learning. There's even an action learning glossary with definitions for each of the common terms in action learning. Our company, Authenticity Consulting, also is available to answer your questions or to help you in any other way. Our firm does very successful action learning groups around the world and for a wide variety of outcomes and applications. There's also the Free Management Library at managementhelp.org. You can find resources and tools for almost any activity in the workplace, including for many of the activities in action learning. You can find more about each of these 3 resources by going to actionlearningcentral.com/gratis and select the presentation entitled General Resources for Action Learning. Thank you.